Welcome to the WRC podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and you're in the right place. Here at the Well-Rounded Counselor podcast, what you can expect is to learn, shift your thinking, and gain personal and professional growth. And if you have not yet done so, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. The conversation starts now. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the WRC podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and I'm so excited to bring you another amazing episode this week here on the WRC podcast. But before I get started, I just want to remind you to sign up below on my waitlist as I am getting closer and closer to announcing the release date of my book, The Well-Rounded Counselor, Considerations for International College Counselors. You don't want to miss it, so make sure you sign up on the show notes with the link below. Now, today's episode is actually an interview by a woman who is a aspiring college counselor herself. Her name is Jane Lee. Now, Jane Lee approached me on LinkedIn and she asked if I would spend 30 minutes of my time answering a bunch of her questions for a class assignment. She is studying the College Counseling Certificate program at UCLA, and a part of one of her assignments is interviewing a counseling practitioner in the field. Without further ado, here's my interview with Jane Lee.
Ending on the well-rounded counselor is the perfect way for us to get started into, like, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into counseling, which I think from your role on LinkedIn is university counseling, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Katrina Watson, and I am a comprehensive university and well-being counselor. I work in a private K through 12 school in Dubai, UAE. And essentially, I work with grade levels 10, 11, and 12. The reason why it's 10, 11, and 12 is because we have a designated grade 9 transitional counselor. And so
And how did you get into college counseling?
Oh, that's a great question. So I started my college counseling career when I was 20 years old. So it was 15 years ago, essentially. And I just applied for a part-time job. I was a college student at California State University, Long Beach, and they were looking for some college advisor aides to go into this program and help low-income students essentially apply for college. And essentially, I wasn't really familiar with the college application process, but they trained you, and then the rest is history. So I really fell in love with working with high school age students and helping them apply to college.
Yeah, I love that. And you're at 20 years old, you're still finishing your degree at Cali State, right? And this was just kind of like a side job that you took and never looked back.
Exactly. I just remember not even really wanting to go to the job interview, and I was like, oh, should I go? Should I not? And then yeah, and then I'm so glad I did, because it really opened me up to a career that I fell in love with. I used to wake up in the morning and like leap out of bed, be like, yes, I'm going to work, which doesn't normally happen on a day-to-day basis. But with this job, it just really inspired me. And because I was doing my undergraduate at the time in something completely different, this motivated me to get a master's degree in counseling.
Wow, I love the story because I was actually reading something the other day that said, like, the millennials right now, we have this way of thinking where it's like your passion is one day gonna come to you, where really it sounds like you found your passion. You were in school for something else and you happen upon an opportunity in college counseling and realize, hey, like, this is my passion, not what I was in school for. So I absolutely love your story. And if you don't mind, I'd love to redirect it back to your current kind of role right now as a university and well-being counselor. Can you tell me a little bit about your day-to-day activities? Like, how does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so my day-to-day definitely varies. If anybody who understands the nature of a school counselor, it's very cyclical, right? So different times of year, there are heavier responsibilities. But because I am in a comprehensive office, what is a comprehensive office? It means you're doing academic advising, college and career advising, and potentially well-being and social emotional advising. You could be dealing with different issues all day long. However, during certain times of year, college applications might take precedence over other things, or maybe at the beginning of the year you're dealing with scheduling, or towards the spring you're dealing with the academic advising piece, helping kids pick their subjects for the next academic year. So it really depends what time of year it is.
Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning that you focus on working with grade 10, 11, 12. I understand that the roles in the day-to-day would look different for helping a student in each of these grades. Do you mind going into a little bit more in depth in terms of what you would work on for a student in grade 10, 11 versus 12?
Yeah, so when we work with them in grade 10, it's a little less hands-on, and that's not just it's not on purpose. It's just kind of the way I think a grade 10 student sees school counselor or their guidance counselor or a college counselor. They don't see the importance straight away, but those that do come see you, they can start talking about work experience opportunities or how to get involved in school and building that career or university profile or personality profile for that matter, figuring out what they like or don't like. We definitely come up with different plans of action for them, like how do you spend your breaks, like winter break, spring break, summer break. Don't just not utilize that time, but actually do something productive. So I try to train my students on how to be productive and stay motivated and keep their eye on the prize, which ultimately is either going to university or maybe they want to go into the world of work straight after high school. It depends on the individual. But again, kind of coming up with that game plan. We also do a lot of academic advising with them because,
Hmm.
again, they're still in that very vulnerable stage of like figuring out which classes they want to take in grade 11 and in grade 12. So, kind of helping them do that roadmap to graduation and doing that academic planning. So, those are the kind of the main things we do with grade 10. With grade
Okay.
11, it's a little hands off still, just because of the need, but they start to come in more frequently. We start talking about the college application process, how to begin that process. What does that look like globally, not just in the US, UK, and Canada, but what does that really look like globally? Especially in a place like
Mhm.
Dubai, we really need to be globally minded because we're dealing with students from literally all over the world and they're
Uh-huh.
matriculating all over the world. So we kind of have to start that process a little earlier than most, I think, school counselors do. So
Mhm.
we teach them, when to start the college application process. We have university visits. We encourage that. We encourage, again, continue building their profile, all of the above. And then in grade
Mhm.
12, it's a lot more hands-on, nuts and bolts, applying and kind of guiding them step by step through that college application process. And in my world,
Mhm.
and particularly my school, it really doesn't end because we do
Mhm.
have kids applying to university even after they graduate because they might be looking at the Southern Hemisphere.
Gotcha, gotcha. And you mentioned a lot of really interesting points that I'd like to go back on. But one of the immediate questions that I had was that is at your school in particular, like, is there a formal process for students coming in to visit you one on one, or is it in group settings? Are they required to come in at least once a month, depending on their grade, or how does that work? Or is it whenever the student wants to pop into your office, they can pop in and be like, "Hey, Katrina, can I talk to you about X, Y, Z?" How does that work?
Yeah, I definitely have an open door policy. That's, a given. I encourage students to pop in if they have quick questions. But again, if they want that detailed, individualized attention, we encourage them to come visit us one on one. We have an online booking system where they can book an appointment at the touch of their phone, so they can essentially book a time that works for them when they're not in class. Sometimes they have a
Mhm.
study hall or they have their lunch break or before or after school, etc. So they can come and talk to us essentially all the time if they want to. And I'm one of those counselors that wants to encourage them to kind of build that responsibility and say, "Hey, I need to go talk to my counselor." So I'm always kind of sending out reminders of just, "Hey, I'm here," especially those ones that are not coming in. And I also try to touch base with their parents and say, "Hey, this is what I've sent your students." So they're kind of also in the loop. And then it kind of gets the momentum going. But then we also do group activities. I do work in a team of other counselors. So we do something called a lunch and learn where we pick a
Ooh, I
topic.
love the learned.
Yes. So we pick a topic that's, quite popular, whether it's applying to Canada or applying to the US or building your profile. And we spend the lunchtime where students can bring their lunch and they literally come in their own accord and they learn about that topic. And it's been pretty successful. This is our first year implementing this, but that's how we build something into the school day. And then, of course, we have our evening sessions, which allow parents to join typically and get a lot of the nuts and bolts information. And we've not only done the junior and senior planning nights, we call them planning nights now, but we also implemented underclassmen planning nights. So we combined the grade 9 and
Wow.
10s. Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds like your students are really well prepared and they sound very, very lucky to have you as a counselor. And I know we're kind of talking a lot about parents. I actually do have a question regarding parents, which is you mentioned a little bit about how you involve parents in the college counseling process. But I was wondering if you had any personal experience dealing with like helicopter parents, parents that like want to micromanage and oversee everything that the student is doing. And if so, like how did you manage that relationship or how did you approach dealing with a call helicopter parent?
I think it comes down to them trusting their kid at the end of the day.
Mhm.
So if they're not trusting their student, then they're not going to trust the process, right? So again, I'm that inclusive person. It's like come in as often as you feel comfortable. You need to come in. If you need to come in as frequently as you need, as long as your son or daughter's there in the meeting, that way we're all getting the same information. I think that's going to be the most helpful. And usually typically the culture in my school is some parents are very hands off depending on where they're from and some are super hands on depending on where they're from. That's just a cultural thing. So
Yes.
the students that I typically work with, they're pretty independent and their parents are a little bit hands off because I think I've built that rapport. I've been at my school now. This is my 8th year.
Yes.
So I've been with what we call like families. Like I stay with the same alphabet group. So I've seen the sibling go through the pipeline and now the little brother, little sister's coming up. So I built that rapport. So I think the trust is there for a lot of my families that I do work with. So at first they might be a bit resistant or reluctant, but again, it's all about building that trust and rapport and letting them be a part of the process and listen and then also make them feel like they're adding value to the process.
And I think you've mentioned a lot of great things in there. And I think that rapport and trust is so, so, so important because this process is unfamiliar for a lot of students and their families, right? But if they can, especially parents, trust that their students and their children are in great hands, I don't see them needing to interfere with the process if everything is already going great. So I absolutely love that. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a little bit earlier in saying that, at the school that you currently work at, everybody's very global, right? So they're just not only looking at local schools, but also thinking about applying to universities like globally. So I'm wondering, like, what percentage of your students, apply to the US, North America, apply to the UK, Asia, or anywhere else? Like, what does that breakdown look like for your students?
So it's hard to track where they're applying in terms of the breakdown, but the matriculations of actually where they're attending is the data that we have. Our students
Amazing.
apply literally to multiple countries. So you can have one student apply to US, UK, Canada, Europe, and maybe in here in Dubai in the Middle East. So again, it's really
Mhm.
hard to track that individual data for our population because there's various factors like they have multiple passports or one parent's from one location and another parent's from another. So again, they want to keep their options open and that's just kind of the mentality of a international school like the school I work in. However, we have like a close to 50% students matriculating to the US, a little over 30 going to the UK, Canada, and then the numbers kind of go down to lower double digits and single digits for the
Yeah.
rest of the world, but it fluctuates depending on what's happening politically in the world, and that has a lot to do with student visas.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And on the topic of like what's happening in the world and everything, I know you mentioned that you've been in your position for 8 years. And so you were in your position pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now kind of as we go into post-pandemic. So how has your role kind of evolved during COVID, pre-COVID, and then throughout COVID to now?
So we were heavily reliant on paper items and brochures and materials. Let's just call it materials. So our office had a lot of paper and a lot of forms and a lot of things. And when we had to go online, everything had to shift to online. So that was something us as a professional had to adapt to in most industries, not only education, but we've also had to adapt to doing presentations online, one-to-one sessions online. And then, although COVID and the pandemic has kind of subsided for the most part, we are still having to provide that added service at our school, particularly both in person and online. Now, that's a
Mhm.
whole nother issue, but still it's now embedded into the culture of convenience and making things convenient
Yeah.
for different people. I do like the idea of having sessions at night online because it does create more access to families versus
Mhm.
them having to come in person. And also, we can
Mhm.
record the information in case somebody misses it. right? So they can go back and replay it. So that's kind of the beauty of what COVID's provided. The whole online arena, and things can be recorded, and we'll always have it, versus the in
Yes.
person of, if you miss it, you miss it, too bad, right? So there's pros and cons to everything, though.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think your point about like the convenience culture is so important. I know like even people working in offices, they're reluctant to go back because now they enjoy the flexibility of being able to work from home, right? And so I totally understand that. But in wanting to dive a little bit deeper and specifically asking like how has the pandemic changed student and parent views on the college admissions process? Like what would your comments there be?
Well, that's a great question. So essentially, they don't necessarily understand quite yet that a lot of schools have become testing optional or testing flexible, due to the nature of test centers not always being available or accessible to students. Of course, being here in Dubai, you do have a lot of accessibility to resources, but there's still a perception out there that if I don't do this, colleges are not even going to look at me. So that's not the case. Like, even though we tell them, we have universities come to school and say it is optional, we're not going to use this information when we evaluate you, there's still some lingering belief that I still need to do it to outshine my peers, right? So
Yeah.
that's one thing that we're still challenged with. And I do think that universities have been very flexible in the recent years, but I think they're slowly going back to being more competitive and strict, and tightening up their criteria, because things have kind of gone back to normal now.
Yeah, and you mentioned a really interesting point because, like, obviously, there's a lot riding on that university acceptance, right? Right. So, being like clenching onto that, I have to submit my SAT or ACT test to have a fighting chance. Like, I totally understand that fear. And going back to what you said in the beginning, you're a comprehensive counselor, right? So, you deal with the university, college advising, but you also deal with the well-being. So, kind of changing gears, I would love to understand a little bit about how do you support students with mental health challenges.
Right. So it is a delicate situation, because if the student's not right, like if they're not well, if they're not coming to school, if they're not, their attitude towards learning is very low, or if they're disinterested, obviously that's a problem right there. So we
Mhm.
want to try and catch that. Any little red flag, we do have a system in place where teachers can refer students to us and say, "Hey, I noticed little Joe's attitude towards learning has been, he's been very distant. He's not been participating as much," whatever that might look like, right? So it could be a variety of observations that kind of show a different behavior pattern. And so then we check in, essentially, just to kind of feel it out. We do reach out to the parents, like saying, "Hey, is everything all right at home?" And typically
Mhm.
parents they don't come straight to us all the time, but when we do make that call and we check in, parents are very appreciative, because then they feel like the school actually cares. A lot of times we
Yeah.
notice that families try to deal with this internally, and they don't even realize that we do comprehensive counseling sometimes. Sometimes they just look at us as a college counselor, and they don't see that we
Yeah.
actually help with the well-being side of things. If the first priority is, again, learning and being a student and crossing that finish line at graduation, because without that, forget university. That's not even going to be the option. So we have to make sure that students' well-being is the priority, again, to be a successful learner and to build the skills that they need so they can go out after they graduate into the real world.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that your role encompasses both aspects because I think they're very interconnected and interdependent, right? Because how can you expect a student to perform and succeed academically if they're struggling with their well-being, right? So I love that
Exactly.
your role like takes care of both of them because I think that's very, very necessary. I love to learn a little bit more about you, and like you mentioned that you went to Cali State, and when you graduated, like how did you end up landing in a position all the way in Dubai? And what do you enjoy the most about your job?
Wow. Okay. So, so I graduated from my master's program back in 2013, and at the time, being in Southern California, I was struggling to get a job in education. They wanted people that spoke Spanish fluently, and of course, I didn't speak Spanish fluently, so that was kind of my downfall.
Mhm.
Being from Southern California, but not having certain skills that job seekers were looking for. But I also always had a love and an affinity for travel. I had a love for study abroad. That was something that was very important to me during my undergraduate study, was living somewhere
Mhm.
else and learning in that kind of environment and learning about cultures and languages and all of that. And I somehow wanted to merge the beauty of the two, like helping other students study abroad. And I didn't know what that really looked like because I was like stuck in my bubble back in Southern California. I was like, how do I make this happen? How do I help other students come study in the US? Like, how does that work? Essentially, I just got online and I started looking up jobs, and I found a random job post online, and I just trusted that it was real, and it was. And they they at the time, Skype was really popular, so essentially I
Yeah.
got on a Skype interview, and the lady was American, saying she was the principal, and it just was
Yes.
so easy and effortless, and I was kinda desperate at the time, to be very honest. I was gonna take anything, because I
Mm,
was fresh out of grad school and I needed a job. So I
yes.
just took that leap of faith and I went for it, and it was tough. It was tough, I'm not gonna lie, but it worked out, and it's only gotten better and better, and Dubai has been very good to me. It's provided me a lot of amazing professional growth, career growth, just so much that I can't even describe. College admissions and counseling, college admissions, let's just say that, is a
Mhm,
very personal process for each
mhm,
individual family. It's an investment at the end of the day, and they want to make sure that they're making the best possible investment. And that's not always done in the most eloquent way. So, my job is to try and make sure that they are investing their time, their money, and their resources in the best way possible. And that can be very tricky and challenging, especially if people are very set on their ways and they have certain expectations, and then those expectations don't get met. So that can be very tricky. And that's one of the biggest challenges I face in my position. There could be a variety of different ethical dilemmas that will pop up. They're little things, but that's why I have a team that I can rely on, and we talk it out, and then we try to prevent further things to happen, or we try to just do small damage control. But that's the beauty of, like I said, being a part of a community and a team.
mhm. I love that. And do you mind giving me like just a small example of what an ethical dilemma could
Oh,
be in your role?
well, it's happening right now. We have students that want to double deposit at different schools. And so we don't encourage that for obvious reasons. We don't want students to double deposit. And like I said, they'll apply to multiple countries. And so
Mhm,
if they're waiting for final examination results, which will happen in the summer, May 1st is just around the corner. So at the time of this podcast, it's end of April. So if they've applied to the US and then they're waiting for a UK confirmation, with their exam results, it's a bit tricky, right? So there's that
mhm,
ethical dilemma of, do I deposit in both places and then see what happens and then I retract and not get my deposit? There's all of that, and we try to say, look, you should be thinking about this long before you've done this. We've tried coaching them. We tried telling them the pros and cons of what will happen. Again, people will do what they want, but we always have to do our due diligence and try our best to prevent that from happening, because it is taking spots from other applicants if that might be on a wait list.
wow, there's a lot that's encompassed in your job and responsibility. So kudos to you. But my next question is that we're in a technology driven world. Even like we're using technology right now to facilitate this podcast. But I was wondering, what technologies do you use to support your job and role as a college counselor?
Well, I mean, we definitely use like an online booking system. That online booking system makes it easy for students to figure out their calendar and my calendar. So that's something that they can just scan a QR code. Again, QR codes were kind of foreign to me up until a few years ago.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so I've
But
learned
I
how to
would say,
make I've learned how to make a QR code. I didn't know that that's going to be something I had to do, but that's just how the generation that I work with functions. Everything's scannable or downloadable off of their phone. So that's one thing that I've had to learn to adapt to. Again, we're trying to teach them basic etiquette of checking email, because that's still what we have to do. We're a big school, so I can't just like easily go walk around school and like talk to kids. So email and Google Classroom, that's something that I had to learn as well. And making announcements. So technology is kind of embedded in everything I do. I don't think I spend a lot of
Mhm.
time off of my computer throughout the day. And when I am sitting with a student or a family, I'm still using my computer because I'm looking up resources, I'm looking up websites. We use a platform called Unifrog, which is like a student management tool to help with like career guidance, university guidance, all of that. So again, it's kind of embedded in everything I do.
Yeah. And I love how there's so many new kind of like ed tech companies that are helping students and counselors and families streamline this very kind of complicated and often stressful process of college applications. You mentioned Unifrog. I'm wondering in your school, let's say you were to come across a new ed tech software that you think could potentially be beneficial for your students. Like, how could a software become implemented and be a part of the programming at your school? Like, who needs to approve the safety of this for their students? Do you as a counselor have the authority and the autonomy to be like, yeah, I want to use this with my students, and then you can directly use it? Or how does that whole process look like? Because I know sometimes schools can get very like bureaucratic, you know?
Yeah, I think we got with our for example, we got with, our platform Unifrog very early on before Naviance decided to go away in the international
Yeah.
world, and so we got with, Unifrog just because it had a Dutch university search tool at the time. That's what we used it for, funny enough, and I was like, "Okay, Naviance doesn't have this, but Netherlands is on the rise, let's use this." So so essentially, we got it for that reason, and because
Mhm.
we were one of the first, we helped with a lot of product development to kind of get it to where it
Mhm.
needed to be. So we've
Mhm.
invested a lot of time, energy, and money with long-standing subscriptions. And the nice thing about the platform that we have is that they're very helpful to adapt or change anything or amend things or expand based off of our needs. And, you know, again, I think the challenge though for a student is that there are so many portals and platforms that maybe their teachers using, that the school is using, that the counselor's using. So that's the challenge. It's not just a one-stop shop. But
Yeah.
again, that a school our size, I don't think it could ever be a one-stop shop. So I think for more
Mhm.
smaller schools, there are potential opportunities for everyone to be on the same page and have all the same resources embedded into one thing.
Yeah. Completely. And I love how the a mutually beneficial relationship that you guys have with Unifrog, like you guys giving them feedback from a user perspective so that they can continue to evolve and be better suited for clients such as yourself. So would you say that you guys found Unifrog, or did Unifrog reach out to you guys?
We
Where
found
was
it.
that kind
We found it back
of?
in, like, 2016 or 2017, yeah, and we just it was just word of mouth by other counselors, kind of in
Mhm.
the international world, and that's kinda how it works. It is a small community at the end of the day, so, one person knows something, and it seems like a nice, helpful tool, and then it just kinda spreads like that.
Oh wow! Like, do you guys have like some sort of a Facebook group or some sort of a platform that all the international counselors are part of to communicate with each other, or what is the kind of communication there?
I mean, it just depends, right? Like, we have different associations, like Council of International Schools. So, if you're a CIS school, you're a part of that membership, or if you are a part of International ACAC or ISCA, or you've just worked in the international world and you just stay in touch with your former colleagues. It just depends. So, there are organizations where you can network, but then there are your own personal networking from just your job history.
Yeah, I actually did have a quick question about the associations of like you mentioned a few. Which one would you say is the most useful for
Uh,
you, based on your experience?
Well, personally, they're all great. I'm not gonna just say one is the best. They all serve kind
Hmm.
of slightly different purposes, and they all provide, like, global kind of, access at certain times of the year. With CIS, I like it because, again, it happens during the school year, and it's usually in Europe, so it's a little bit closer to where I'm at in Dubai. But then there's International ACAC, which happens in the summer when we're a little tired and checked out, but they try to make it fun for us. But that's usually in the US or Canada. So again, it just really depends. And
Hmm.
ISCA is more on the social emotional side. So
Hmm.
that happens in the springtime. So again, they all serve different purposes and they all happen different times a year. And in my office, we all rotate and take turns attending these different types of big conferences.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's honestly all the questions that I had for you today. And thank you so much for giving me such comprehensive answers. I have so much to work with. Before we leave off, like, did you have any last comments or pieces of advice for other counselors or people aspiring to become international school counselors?
Well, feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions. I'm here to help. I'm here to mentor. I'm very passionate about helping aspiring counselors break into the international world. I didn't have a mentor back in the day, which was like 10 years ago. So I'm definitely all for helping people wanting to start their career in international education.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. I'm a huge believer in everything happens for a reason, and there must be a reason I landed on your profile on LinkedIn and reached out. So I want to again say thank you so much for your time and taking time out of your day and doing this quick little interview with me. The pleasure was all mine, and I learned so much from you today. So thank you. And I definitely will take you up on the offer of reaching out at some point after I complete my degree. So thank you again so much, Katrina.
Anytime, Jane. Best of luck. Did you love the episode? I hope you're feeling inspired and no longer feeling alone out there, and you're ready to evolve and become a better person. Make sure that you share this podcast or take a screenshot and post it on your social media. That's how you help spread this podcast organically, and people can find it much easier when you share, or share it with a loved one. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and make it your mission to be a blessing in someone else's life today.